There have been some questions about how the Biden administration will handle the Iran threat. But the answer is clearer now after President Biden's latest appointment of Rob Malley as special envoy for Iran. Malley was actively involved in negotiations between Iran and the U.S. for the nuclear deal under the Obama administration. Today, we're happy to have Bryan Leib joining us here live in the studio to weigh in on this. He is a political strategist. He is a former GOP congressional candidate and author of this article on Newsmax titled, "The Iran Appeasement Team is Back in Place." Bryan, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on, and good to see you here in person. I know you and I talk a lot.
Likewise. Thanks for having me in.
Absolutely. Talk to me about this. Iran's president Thursday applauded the ruling by the UN's highest court that it can hear Iran's case, calling it a, quote, big victory. Talk to me about this and negotiations with Iran. How do you read that?
You know what I find extremely interesting about this, Sean, is the fact that just last week the UN stripped Iran from having any kind of voting rights at the UN because they failed to pay something like $15 million in their annual dues. So here you have Iran celebrating the fact that they've won this big decision in the UN. They don't even have voting rights in the UN. It's the height of hypocrisy. This is what Iran does. They're just out of control.
Does that change the former Trump administration's policies? How do you read that?
Well, I don't know if it changes the policies. I mean, I think, listen, the bottom line is the fact that the Iranian regime is not a friend of America, and we need to continue with the maximum pressure campaign that even people within Iran are supportive of. There was a letter that just came out, I think, a couple days ago, Sean, where you have Iranians saying to President Biden, continue the sanctions. It's working. But, you know, all signs point to, unfortunately, they're not going to be doing that. And the people like Kerry and Sullivan and Malley and everyone else that Biden has reassembled, they're trying to get us back into this deal with Iran quicker than you can even possibly imagine.
Talk to me about Malley, as you mentioned him. Who is he? What has he done in the Biden or the Obama administration in years prior? And what can we expect moving forward with Iran? Does he change anything up? What do you expect? Is there something that you're worried about?
Of course, I'm extremely worried. I mean, Rob Malley, like John Kerry, were practicing shadow diplomacy over the last couple of years here, working behind the scenes while the Trump administration was creating peace through the Abraham Accords with no bloodshed in the Middle East. You have Malley and Kerry behind the scenes working to cut our legs off. I mean, the bottom line is we need to continue this pressure, and Rob Malley is not the guy to put the pressure on. Rob Malley is a guy who is the architect of the JCPOA, and he's more concerned about Javad Zarif, who's Iran's foreign minister. He's more concerned about keeping him happy than keeping the American people happy, in my opinion.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember him, if this is correct, he spoke out against the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, something that President Trump took credit for. Is that correct? Was he not in support of taking out that general?
He 100% spoke out about that and said that it was a major move that would lead us to a war with Iran. And what's interesting about that, I just mentioned Zarif. Zarif issued a very similar statement. It almost, you know, compare the two, it looks like it was the same statement. So, yeah, it's unfortunate that Biden has continued to surround himself with these people. And what's really concerning to me is another gentleman we haven't talked about is Secretary of State Blinken. So 2 weeks ago, Blinken said it's going to be a long time, guys, before Iran has enough uranium for a nuclear weapon. And we just learned this week now Blinken is saying, no, guys, it's going to happen in a couple weeks. So the question has to be asked, Sean, why are they trying to speed up a process to get back into bed with the Iranian regime? This is a regime that hangs gay men in the streets by industrial-sized cranes. This is a regime that opens live fire ammunition into the crowd. This is a regime that chants death to America and death to Israel. This is not someone that we need to be getting back into bed with. And all signs point to, unfortunately, that's going to be happening.
With the Iran nuclear deal or another Iran nuclear deal, do you see any good coming out of that? Can you trust Iran? Many say you can't trust Iran in that deal.
You 100% cannot trust Iran. Iran, the whole premise, one of the premises, Sean, of the JCPOA was the fact that we were unfreezing billions of dollars of funds to go to the Iranian regime. Well, guess what? That money never went to the actual people of Iran. It went to funding terrorist proxies like Hamas, like Hezbollah all around the world. I mean, you know, listen, they haven't changed their tune since 1979 with the big revolution. So I'm not thinking it's going to change.
Let me
anytime
take
soon.
real quick 10 seconds with you. I think about Israel at the same time when I talk about Iran. Any concerns with that?
Of course, this is a regime that chants death to Israel, and that it's time to wipe the Zionists off the planet. So, of course, we need to do everything that we can to keep the maximum pressure campaign because it's working. We need to keep it going.
That's Bryan Leib joining us live here. Bryan, good to see you
Thank you,
finally
Sean.
in person, sir.
Likewise.
Always a pleasure to have your brain on this. And